Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, January 31st, 2013. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. This week, Michael Tonsmeire and Nathan Zeender talk about dark lagers. Yes, lagers are much more than that yellow fizzy stuff that dominates Super Bowl advertising. Mike and Nathan will tell us more and give us an update on their budding professional brewing careers. If you're new to home brewing or would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can follow me on Twitter. My username is Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. Our show page on Facebook is at facebook.com/basicbrewing. Thanks again to everybody clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. You know how it works. If you think of Amazon and you want to do some shopping for some stuff, don't go to Amazon first. Go to our website first, basicbrewing.com. Click on our Amazon link on the right-hand side of the page, and that will take you to Amazon, and then we will get some credit for whatever you buy during that session. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you this show, and we greatly appreciate your support. We also have associate links for Brew Your Own Magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too, that work in the same way. You can find our Basic Brewing iPhone app on iTunes and our Android app on Amazon.com. And we're in the BlackBerry podcast directory, too, and we're in the Stitcher app as well. Even if you are a technologically inclined brewer who uses an app of some sort to design and log recipes, you still need a Basic Brewing Brewer's Logbook to keep you by the brew pot, or to keep by the brew pot. Not just to keep you by... It won't keep you by the brew pot, but you can keep it by the brew pot. Too much coffee this morning. You can jot down variances as you brew, and it won't matter if you spill a little wort on it or a hot scotchy. Our brewers' logbooks never have to be rebooted, and you can see them well in direct sunlight. You can use the calendar section to track your brews, and it's a blank calendar, which means that your brewing year can start any time. And in the back of the book is room for all the details of 50 brewing sessions. Check it out at our store, basicbrewingshop.com. A couple of things more before we get started. Tuesday, February 5th, is the day when conference registration begins for the National Homebrewers Conference. And you want to pay attention to that date because odds are it will sell out quickly, and we don't want you to miss out on your chance to go to Philadelphia and have a lot of fun and learn lots of stuff, and we'd like to see you there too. February 5th, ahaconference.org. Don't miss out. Things are happening in the Mississippi legislature in regards to legalizing home brewing. We hope that this year's persistence will win out, and our favorite hobby will be legit in Mississippi. Things are happening quickly, so follow Raise Your Pints Mississippi on Twitter. That's at Raise Your Pints to keep up to date. I've been retweeting some of that stuff, but like I say, it's happening so quickly that a tweet can get old pretty quick. Couple of quick notes from the mailbag. Chad from Michigan wrote after hearing last week's show on milling grain. Chad says, to measure the mill gap setting, the spark plug gap tool is also known as a feeler gauge. I just purchased one myself for that exact purpose. Well, thanks, Chad. And y'all can insert your own joke here about the name feeler gauge. Also, a few of you wrote with the tip of using a credit card to test the width of your mill roller gap. I checked mine with a credit card just this morning, and it's pretty close to what I have mine set at, so a solution may be right in your pocket. Just one more thing. Steve Wilkes and I have posted a new episode of Basic Brewing Video this week featuring New Albion Ale. We tasted the beer, talked about its history, and brewed a six-pack all-grain batch out of it, and we challenged you, our viewers, to do the same, and we plan to taste our beer in about a month, and we're hoping that those who have brewed along with us will share their comments on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel as well. So take a look at that episode and play along. It's pretty fun and easy recipe to do. Now let's talk to Michael Tonsmeire, the Mad Fermentationist, and Nathan Zeender, the slightly less mad fermentationist, about their article in Brew Your Own magazine on dark lagers. Michael Tonsmeire and Nathan Zeender, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
It's a pleasure as always to be on here, James.
Yeah, thanks again.
We're going to talk about dark lagers here in a minute, but I want to catch up because you've got some exciting stuff going on. Last we talked, I think you were talking about getting into the world of professional brewing, and we want an update. What's going on?
Yeah, sure. I'll start first, Nathan. Right Proper is sort of full steam ahead. We just recently took hold of our brew house and a mill and 36 barrels, like wine and spirit barrels, that we'll be using to do what I'm calling Baroque beer, so the mixed fermentation blended beers. We hopefully will be announcing our space in the next few weeks, and hopefully that would put us on a trajectory to be open in, say, the next 6 to 9 months, something like that. But, I'll just sort of be relatively vague with that because you never really know with all the permitting and the build out and all that kind of stuff. But things are looking really fantastic. And Mike, what are your
Modern
updates?
Times is on a very similar timetable. We have a space in Point Loma, California, San Diego, very close to SeaWorld, 12,500 square feet in a pristine office, parky kind of warehouse space area. The equipment's all been ordered. It's showing up sometime around March for the most part, the brew house. And then with permitting and installation and all that stuff, it will probably be summertime into fall time when finally we're up and running.
I think 2013 is just a good.
It's a good year. Exactly. Sometime in 2013.
Just say
hopefully.
2013.
And I'm hoping to be out in California for at least a couple of weeks to a couple of months, right around the time things get open, just to make sure that all the babies that I've been developing for the last year turn out the way I hope they will from the commercial system. We just really start packaging. Our can designs are really cool. Someone pointed out they look a little like 1980s tube socks, very cool scripty titles, and then sort of a different color for each of the core beers. A 5% Saison, an oatmeal coffee stout that Nathan and I were just trying the most recent batch of. Good. An amber IPA, and what was the third one? The fourth one is the hoppy wheat beer was Citra and Amarillo, or Citra and something, depending. Amarillo is getting a little hard to come by these days.
Yeah, I think I saw the picture of the cans somewhere on Twitter or Facebook or somewhere.
Almost certainly.
Yeah, they're very cool looking.
Oh, I'm just going to put a caboose onto the end of this too. I forgot. I have another sort of fun project that I'm working on in the sort of artisan beer, not beverage world. I shouldn't say the beer world. So it's something called Wildcraft Soda. It's sort of a one-man, small batch, draft only botanical soda company that I'm just launching now. That I will plug into the brew pub when it opens. But it's going to be sort of taking everything I've learned from the sort of world of herbalism and bittering spirits and brewing, and all kinds of sort of things. So I'll just be making these heavily botanical sodas, just lightly sweetened with honey, working with wildcrafted, so ethically foraged whole botanicals. So when I get those up and going, I'll send you some, and hopefully we can talk in more detail about that at some point.
Oh, definitely. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Yeah, they're pretty fantastic.
They're really surprising. I haven't been much of a soda guy in a long time, and these are. I mean, it's almost like somewhere between like an iced tea, sort of lightly sweetened, complex herbal, but still the sort of thing that if it was cold over ice that you could just drink and be refreshing. It doesn't hit you over the face.
When you say soda, sometimes it's a little. It's almost more like these Italian bitters, sort of Amaro-y kind of things. That's all our plugging for now. We can talk. Happy to talk about one of our favorite subjects, which is dark lagers.
Yeah.
Well, you got to say your Twitter addresses so that or Facebook or however people.
Yeah. So
Nathan just got Twitter. I mean, this
is all new to me, and I'm not the one who runs it. Thor actually runs it all the time. But it's at Right Proper Beer, I believe, and then the for the sodas, it's wildcraftsoda.com. And then Mike would I'm
at Mad Fermentation. It just barely fit. It's the longest Twitter I could get.
Thanks, James.
Oh yeah, well it's exciting. We're living vicariously through you in the brewing capacity, and we didn't even mention the new baby for Nathan. So
that's another about 9 weeks ago we had our first wee boy Finn. So that's been a wonderful, really amazing experience. I think that is also another reason for the sort of sodas. I'll have something sort of healthy, and to share with Finn until he's up for drinking the beers. Thanks again for that.
I met someone who named their child Finn the other day because that was the end. So
there's all these tie-ins. Like it's actually spelled Fhinn, and it's sort of I'm getting off topic here. Sorry, but
like I
love talking about him.
He can
it's sort of a link to like Huck. There's Huck Finn, and there's Finnegan's Wake, which is a wonderful book, and then there's these standing stones in the Outer Hebrides called Finn Pogball, so I can take them there. And then I love the Finnish culture, so we can take them to Finland. And yeah. Well, enough of that, right? Let's talk about lagers.
All right. Well, okay. We'll talk about some beer then, since this is a beer show. But it's always fun. Like I say, it's always fun to catch up with you guys.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Another fun thing, just before we get on to it, people go through the archives in a hurry. So, who knows? The people who are in the archives can listen to Finn growing up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they can say, "I remember the show when they talk." Okay,
right on.
We're going to talk about lagers. We're going to talk about dark lagers. Now, in this country and throughout the world, lagers have somewhat of a sketchy reputation among craft beer lovers. Because most of the lager that's out there is the yellow fizzy stuff, but this is not that. What are we talking about here?
Dark lagers are probably the original lagers. This is before the days of Pilsner Urquell and the pale malted barleys. And then the tradition sort of started back then when dark was the only option. It's really continuing today when dark is really about flavor more than anything, and getting some of those roasty, toasty notes that people really expect in stouts and porters and brown ales into a lager, which has a really clean fermentation profile that really allows those malty flavors to be showcased and highlighted. And often they involve things like smoked malts. I think Nathan and I are both big fans of.
Yeah, definitely.
We're drinking right now Victory Red Thunder, which is actually we mentioned in the BYO article Baltic Thunder, which was a beer, sort of a reincarnation of Heavyweight Brewing's Perkuno's Hammer, which was really the original as far as we can tell.
Yeah.
Or sort of at least the most influential Baltic porter brewed in America.
And that would have been in like the
late 90s,
probably
like 2000s.
Around 2000 or so. And I think we probably talked about Tom Baker several times. Maybe almost every time we've been on this interview. He's a real favorite of ours, who was always bringing innovative new ideas, a lot of times from forgotten beer ways, I guess after he did that Baltic Porter in the late 90s or early 2000s, you've seen them. You've seen quite a few of the Baltic Porters like in the last 10 years or something like that. But it really is, like you're saying, James, I think it's I don't know, you don't see a whole lot of craft breweries focusing on it. It takes a lot of more energy. It's less efficient to brew these beers. It takes a lot of refrigeration, takes a lot of your capacity. So you can tie up your capacity for extended periods of times. If you have to lager these beers for 4 or 8 weeks or whatever.
And the same issue for a home brewer. If you only have a couple of fermenters, you might have to lager it for 6 weeks or 8 weeks, and that's time that you can't be fermenting an ale every 2 weeks in your fermenter if you're the sort of brewer who likes turning things over quickly and brewing a lot.
But there's no probably better showcase for malt. Like I think these days when you look at the SKU numbers and the sales numbers for craft beer, it's like IPAs or some ridiculous amount of that, and people seem to be very much obsessed with hops these days. But the heart of the beer, the body of the beer, the malt is really the main ingredient, and there's no better way of showcasing. Not even just, I guess I'm focusing on malt because you think about dark lagers, you think about malt, but it's a way of you sort of taking all those yeast derived flavors out of the equation for the most part, and it can be minimizing them, so then it can be a showcase for malt. You could also use it as a showcase for hops as well, too. You could do a super hopped up lager, but it's just a way of
Jack's Abbey and the brewery and a couple of others have all done these really fantastic super hoppy lagers. It's not what you think of this one we're talking about today, but I mean it can showcase any number of flavors.
Yeah, so it's a way of pushing something down and pushing something else up. And yeah, like we're saying, you just don't see a lot of them just because they can be very technical to brew. Just the extra time
and equipment. I mean, no matter how good your process is, if you don't have a way to control fermentation temperature, if you don't have a way to grow enough yeast, if you don't have a way to cold store the beer for at least a couple of weeks in your freezing, you're not going to get as clean of a beer as a perfectly executed, German or Czech or in these days American lager.
Yeah, and these with the yeast, especially like Mike saying, you need so much. More yeast generally than you would need in doing a similar gravity ale.
About twice as much as the general ballpark amount.
So, so these can be intimidating styles, I think, for the home brewer, for the larger, the craft brewer.
But I think if you're just getting into lagers, dark lagers are a really terrific place to start because they're a lot more forgiving. A little bit of haze in an American, light lager, and that really throws out a category. A dark lager, a lot like a stout, there's a little bit of haze, you're really not going to notice that much. And when we're talking dark lagers, and so the traditional ones are German Schwarzbiers and Dunkels. Those are sort of from that area. In the article, we talked a lot about Tmav, which is the sort of Czech equivalent, somewhere between Schwarzbier and Dunkel. Mm-hmm. There's Baltic Porters. We might even throw in something like Doppelbocks in there too, or even Bocks. I mean, those are sort of the most traditional styles.
Yeah, and sort of for this article that we wrote, sort of approached three brewers who we really respect, and sort of asked them for a little bit of background on some dark lagers that they had brewed, and then work with them, to get recipes. So they're sort of very tried and true recipes. So for the first, I believe the first thing we talk about in the article is the Baltic Porter.
Yep.
So I reached out to Anders Kissmeyer, who currently is running a beer project in Scandinavia called Kissmeyer Beer, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Anders is, I guess, widely considered maybe like a real brewing expert in Scandinavia. Like everyone sort of looks to him for technical knowledge and for historic facts about style. So I knew that's where I wanted to go when I was starting to look down, look at the sort of the Baltic tradition. That's these dark beers that were brewed in the sort of the Baltic states. And he had actually spent time before he got into sort of craft brewing at Brygges, Nørrebro Brygges, at Carlsberg, which had brewed the first. That's where lager brewing was born. Kind of.
Yes, I mean, that's where a lot of things. They used to be sort of, I think that's where the hydrometer was invented. It's where Brettanomyces was isolated, and it's where, and all sorts of things. That used to be sort of the real research center of the brewing world.
And then he had come from that very solid background, and he's very super technical brewer. And then he had at Nørrebro, he had done a lot of very forward-thinking beers. He had done several Baltic porters. He had worked with Sean Hill, who is now at Hill Farmstead, and mentored him, and they've done a series of really amazing Baltic porters together. So I really knew to if we really wanted a good Baltic Porter recipe to ask Anders, and he was great, gave me ton of research and background on style, and provided us with a really fantastic recipe.
Yeah, it's not, but it's also not a super traditional recipe. It's got some honey in there. It's got, I mean, we can all debate how much smoke was in something. If there's some smoke malt in there, whether that's, a traditional flavor or not, is something for the beer historians and not us. But it's delicious. I mean, that's what's the most important.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's also licorice root in the recipe as well.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you're doing a Baltic porter or a lager porter or lager version of a porter, can you just port a recipe that you like for the ale side of things over into the lager side and just use a different yeast?
You certainly could. I mean, it probably wouldn't get you to where the currently defined BJCP style is. Baltic pours are all like Schwarzbiers. They tend to have a very mellow roast. Schwarzbiers can have a little bit more aggressive, a little bit more chocolate coffee kind of thing, but they tend not to have what a lot of porters, that black patent, acrid, sharper kind of roast. So they'll often rely on either something like Carafa Special, which has been dehusked and as a result isn't very bitter, or Sinmar, which is a Weyermann product, where it's an extract of Carafa that's mainly color.
I think both of us really love those dehusked products. Yeah. I mean, they're just, you get this mellow, round, chocolately flavor that you
caramel too.
Yeah, that you just can't get from other. I really love using the Carafa malts. But going back to what you were referencing, James, it's we had to pick only a certain amount of styles because we weren't writing the whole. I mean, it had to be, it's like however many thousand words,
like 2,500 words,
so
including recipes.
In the early runnings, I was really pushing for. I wanted to include a beer from Northern California, from Moonlight Brewing. That I guess Brian Hunt and Moonlight would call a San Francisco black lager or something like that, and that is sort of like it's kind of a steam beery kind of thing where he's taken a lot of. It's pretty much like. It doesn't have all the carafe kind of round things. It's actually a little, he says he wants it almost to have like an iced tea kind of sharpness to it. So it doesn't always, these dark lagers don't always have to be round and sort of chocolatey, but that's his Death and Taxes is the.
If anyone doesn't know Moonlight, it's pretty much draft only, and he does mostly American ingredients, I believe, or all American ingredients.
Yeah.
And so, for example, he's got a great Pilsner called Reality Check that is all pearl hops. That is delicious, but sort of not what you'd expect with, that more aggressive hopping that you'd expect from a West Coast beer, but still sort of a European hop character.
So so you can take, like what would be more considered like an ale recipe, and try out, using and just giving it the sort of lager treatment.
So if you when you're using an ale yeast, you get more of the sort of fruity esters. You get more of a less clean, so to speak, character from the yeast. And do the sort of tannic or the acrid characters of those sort of more bitter dark malts, are they too present when you take out a lot of the yeast character when you do like a lager yeast that's just so very clean?
I'm not sure if it's a question of, it would certainly highlight them. I think it's more of a stylistic issue that European brewers tend to strive for, particularly continental brewers, for like a really smooth, mellow, rounded sort of flavor overall, and that's, I think, part of why lager yeast became so popular. I think it could certainly work, and there are some, sharper lagers out there. But I think it's just sort of the way the styles have evolved.
Yeah, and usually, there's nothing wrong with it. It had little punchier, angular flavors, but it's just sort of whatever you're going for. If you have a vision of a beer and you sort of deconstruct where you want it to be.
Talk about this. Is it Tonsmeire?
I believe it is Tonsmeire. So that is a sort of an obscure style.
Sort of.
I was very, very honored to be invited out a couple of years ago to brew a Tonsmeire at Devil's Backbone with a very talented brewer named Jason Oliver, who I think this year at the GABF's won like 8 medals. Guy just dominates. He has a real talent for lager brewing.
He was our local Gordon Biersch guy, and always. I mean, but Gordon Biersch, really, you don't get much freedom there. But all of his beers were always terrific until he opened Devil's Backbone. Maybe 3 years ago,
something like
4 years ago.
And just whenever he enters a competition, now I think everyone just puts their hands in their head. It's like, damn, Jason, he just crushes every just medals like a madman. But he had so this is down around outside of Charlottesville, Virginia, and he is friendly with a beer blogger down there who I'm sure some of a good number of your listeners would be aware of, a Scotsman named Alistair Reese, who runs the Fuggled brewing blog. And I had lived in the Czech Republic for a long period of time, so he had sort of convinced Jason, I think, to brew this Tonsmeire. Jason was all for it. Jason has a real mind for historic brewing. When I spent an evening with him at his place, and he's had an amazing library of just like every brewing text you can imagine. He seemed to studied them all pretty thoroughly. But yeah, so that was my first time I had ever even heard of the style, I think. And then so Alistair and Jason were brewing this double decocted Tonsmeire, and it was a great brew day. I had never sat in on a decoction before on a professional scale. I'd done them at home, but it was kind of neat. He has this amazing brew house that has a separate cereal cooker. So you just hit you're able to pump over whatever percent, some percent of the mash. It has an agitator in the bottom.
It's secondhand from Japan.
Correct? Yeah. A lot of all the instructions are in Japanese characters. But he handles it like a pro. So that was my first time I'd ever been around that beer. So in the article, we referenced that recipe. That this sort of double decocted. A Tonsmeire is a dark, moderate gravity lager from the Czech Republic. Also, a huge help on that doing research on that was the very talented beer writer Evan Rail, who lives over in that area, and his just what is the essay he did that?
Why beer matters?
Yeah, if your listeners haven't read that, that's a really fantastic bit of beer writing. But Evan did a lot of footwork too that we talk about in the article about the history of that style, the malts that are used. There's
one of which is impossible to get.
But he says, the carafa. So what we used is Weyermann Maltings. It's this fantastic malting house, right? That we can all luckily is available to us in the United States. They put out a floor malted. We've probably talked about this in past interviews, but they put out a floor malted Bohemian Pilsner malt. That can be beat up really. You can decoct it, and it's under modified. So that was the base for that beer.
And it's just Nathan and I both used it. We both used it in the Pilsner Urquell.
Yeah,
Nathan and I both entered a Pilsner Urquell brew a Czech Pilsner contest and have 50. We both ended up in the top 6. Nathan got second, and we both used this fantastic malt, and we both had. And I think they did a little survey, I think, of the people who were in the top 6.
Like everyone had
4 or 5 of them had used this one malt. It's pretty hard to get your hands on. So
now, I guess we should say that for those who don't know, that decoction is where you raise the temperature of the mash by taking, say, a third of the grain out and boiling it separate from the mash tun, and then adding it back in. And it's kind of a controversial process because it does take a lot of time and it does take a lot of energy, and the differences some say are too subtle to be worthwhile. But I mean, I guess if you're using the right kind of malt, if you're using a malt that is not as well modified as they were in the old days, that it might have more of a flavor impact than, say, one of the more modern, better modified malts?
I'm not sure if it would have more of a flavor impact. I think the lower modification of a malt like that is more that it protects it. In a decoction, if you say decocted a beer that was all Maris Otter tends to be very highly modified, and if you break down the protein anymore with protein rest and decoction, you're going to start losing head retention, losing body. Whereas with an undermodified malt, you're still breaking down large chunks of protein into smaller head beneficial amino acids and shorter chains. I think what it allows you to do is to really push those decoctions maybe longer and to, I think there is a lot of debate about it. I know we quote Jason saying that, he can taste it, side by side, but part of the reason he does it is out of a sense of tradition, out of a sense of being a contrarian to doing things the old-fashioned way.
Craftsman's approach to brewing.
And it could be that if you know what you're looking for, you can find it. I mean, we took part in that experiment with at the Homebrewers Conference. When was that? A 3 years ago. They all run together after a while, but someone had done an experiment with decoction, and we had Michael Ferguson, the brewer he's from BJ's, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was a decoction advocate. He had done a presentation talking about decoction, and so we put him up to the test, and we did a blind tasting with those beers, and he picked out the one that was the decoction beer. So, so there you go. Oh, I know. I think it was at the WAHA, the Washington Homebrewers Association guys. They're screaming at the radio or the not the radio, but anyway. That was a really good experiment, and, cheers to Michael for stepping up and taking a risk, putting his opinions on the line. But he picked out the decoction beer, so it could be that if there is something subtle, if you know what you're looking for, if you know what the character is, then you can pick it out. Otherwise, it may be more of a subconscious kind of a thing going on.
Exactly. No, and I think that's just sort of something people have to make a decision for themselves. If you brew a beer, it might be the sort of thing that you don't do on the first batch, that you get everything else dialed in, you get the malt bill dialed in, and you get your fermentation down before you sort of spend that extra time and effort and the extra money to hunt down the right malt that works with the decoction. And then maybe once you get it really close, try the decoction and see if it gives you that extra little oomph, that extra little special character that you can't get any other way.
But this recipe that's in the article that Alistair provided for us is going to be wonderful one way or the other.
Yeah.
It's just a really great recipe. So, it would be a fun sort of experiment to do in the future. And if you want to be sort of the cool kid at your next homebrew meeting, bring a Tonsmeire, and everyone else like, whoa, what is that?
Yeah.
And especially you get extra points if you say it's double decocted.
Exactly.
Even if it's not. And then you get people saying, yeah, I can taste that.
Right.
And then you guys have recipes for, and you also have both all grain and partial mash recipes for each of these. You have a triple bock as well.
And that's actually what we're drinking right now. I probably cheated a little bit in the article we sent in probably 2.5 months ago, and I brewed the beer, but it was still sitting in the lagering. And this one was inspired by Steve at Delivery, who very generously gave me sort of an outline for the recipe. He didn't give me sort of all the details.
And the Delivery is a great sort of brew pub in Benton Harbor, Michigan.
Yeah, and Nathan was up there, and had a blast. And
yeah, it's... I'll just pop in for one quick second, not to get too far off topic, but as we can do. But it's I think I'd heard something about it. I was on a road trip out there and just stopped in and just had the most wonderful experience. The assistant brewer was working that night, so I got lucky. And
it was like a Sunday night or something.
Yeah, it was like a Sunday night. They were winding down, and literally they had 2 14% alcohol sour beers on. They had a cider that they made in-house. They made a wine they had on tap in-house. They had several lagers. They had a couple different takes on IPA, one with a Belgian strain yeast, I think a dark IPA. They had 2 or 3 cask beers. I was there with the hardest working guys in Michigan, and it was just this great little brew pub. And so then I was glad that Mike was able to connect with Steve, the brewer there, and maybe tell us more about that.
Yeah, no, and so it's an interesting recipe more for how it gets its color than anything else. It's a wheat lager, and he's alternately called it a Weizen triple Bock and a triple Weizenbock, I think. But it's not when you think of Weizenbock, you think of Adventinus or something like that has a Hefeweizen strain that has the banana and the clove and the fruit. And this is a lot clearer than that, but the base recipe, the malt, is pretty similar. It's about a third wheat malt, and then dark Munich, Pilsner, and Vienna for the rest. And then most of the color comes from Simpson's Extra Dark Crystal Malt, which is a crystal caramel malt that's even darker than something like Special B. It's about 160 Lovibond. And to me, it adds just a little hint of like a chocolate or something like that, like you might get from a carafa. But then also, dark fruit, prunes, raisins, big caramel. And they do a version of that beer that's aged in a bourbon barrel. And so for mine, I did 5 gallons. I put it into a malt whiskey barrel from a little distillery in Texas called Balcones, who were nice enough to send me a couple of barrels with the promise that I would send them a little bit of whatever came out of them. And so, it's just been in the bottle about 2 weeks now, and it's just barely starting to get the first hints of carbonation.
It's a great dessert beer.
Yeah, it started about 1104, 1107 or something. And then plus it was in the first use barrel, so it's probably up at 12.5 or 13% alcohol.
Wow.
And so I repitched a fresh starter of WLP 833 Bock Lager, which is the Eyinger strain, which I think is fantastic for any sort of really malt-forward lager. It really sort of highlights the malt character of something like that. It's not too attenuative. It leaves a decent amount of body, but it's certainly not a sticky sweet beer. Although there's definitely still a bit of priming sugar in there that needs to get fermented out.
But for sort of high gravity brewing, people would the Russian Imperial Stout, barley wine, thing like that. So we wanted to say these can be lagers too.
Yeah.
We talk about Sammy Claus from Austria,
which is even bigger than this. I mean, it's 14%. It's been brewed since the early '80s,
and a wonderful vintage beer. Cracked open after 10 years, something like that. So. Like high gravity brewing doesn't strictly have to be in the world of ale brewing.
But being lager, lager brewing is a bit more difficult than ale brewing for various reasons. And then when you do a high gravity lager,
a truckload of yeast,
you get extra credit for that.
Yeah. And I didn't do this, and I probably should have. But one of the great moves to do either for ales or lagers is to harvest yeast from a previous batch.
Mm-hmm. To
do a Tamav, harvest the yeast, get 2 cups, 3 cups of nice dense slurry, and then pitch that into your Doppelbock or your Triple Bock or your Baltic Porter or your Imperial Double IPA with lager yeast or whatever sort of high gravity thing you want to do. Unless you've got a big 5-liter stir plate or something like that, it's otherwise it's pretty tough.
And we should say that this is not the same Sam Adams Triple Bock.
No, exactly. And Triple Bock is, I think we said, a much maligned term. Sam Adams Triple Bock.
It wasn't even clear if that was a lager or not, right?
I have no idea what it was, but it's what turned into Utopias eventually. That's what the project sort of got into. I mean, I remember when I was first getting into craft beer 7 or 8 years ago, and Sam Adams Triple Bock, living in Boston, was on the shelf. It was 10 years old, and it was $4 a bottle or something like that. Soy sauce is the most common descriptor. But from what I understand, every batch of Utopia still has a little bit of that original 1993, 1994 Triple Bock in it.
Oh, wow.
But really, the German Doppelbocks, I think people think of Doppelbock in America and think of big and boozy and strong. And something like Eyinger Celebrator is only 6.7% alcohol. And they're pretty reasonably strengthed. It's the sort of thing that in Germany you could still drink at least a half Mass of, if not a full Mass, depending on what your personal tolerance was. And so something like Triple Bock, I think, it's more on the line of something like an Eisbock, something that's really potent, something that splitting a 12-ounce bottle between 2 people is probably all you want in front of the fire on a cold winter night.
That's kind of what Steve and I did, Steve Wilkes and I, way back when we very first started homebrewing. I think it was probably 1996 or something like that. and we were over at his house, and we had gone to the liquor store to get, go for a beer run. And this is back when in Northwest Arkansas, if you could get Killian's Red or Red Dog, wasn't that a beer that was out? Those were considered, kind of crafty beers back then around here. And we found this little blue bottle of, Sam Adams Triple Bock, and we said, oh, let's get one of those and split it. And so that's what we did. We took it back to his house and split the bottle. And it was a shock to the system, to say the least.
I'm amazed that you were allowed to buy that in Arkansas that long ago. I guess you guys didn't have the alcohol by volume cap that some other states had.
No, just at that time, the good beers just weren't coming in. It's not that they weren't allowed to come in, but you spend a lot of time in the article talking about just the basics sort of lager brewing, and there's different ways to do it. I mean, people there's a matter of preference as far as pitching the yeast cold or pitching the yeast when where it's a little warmer. So kind of quickly run through your preferences on the lagering process.
Sure, I'll give my sort of basic process. My groundwater here, and I'm sure you have this problem too, isn't cold enough to get a lager down into the 40s to pitch. As a lot of people do pitch warm, and I've just never been convinced by that. To me, it would be like pitching an ale at 85 and then saying, well, by the time it gets going, it'll be down into the 70s. It's too much of a risk. If you do it right, I've had people tell me that their friend or they do that and it works out fine. And if you time it right and you've got the right strain, and maybe if your palate isn't sensitive enough to or that you don't mind a little bit more fruitiness than maybe a traditional lager, that works all right. For me, chilling it all the way down, what I use is groundwater to get down to 80 or 90 degrees, and I switch over to a submersible pump that I put into a bucket of ice water. I use a submersible pump to run ice water, nearly freezing water, through my immersion chiller. And that gets it all the way down to hopefully the high 40s, mid to high 40s, at which point I pitch my big pitch of yeast, and then I use a fridge with a fermentation temperature control, on-off, Johnson control, whatever, to keep it in the around 48, 49. As fermentation slows, I let the lager warm up a little bit. Once fermentation's done, I let it warm up. People sort of debate over diacetyl rest and check if it's necessary. I just always do a diacetyl rest. I don't see any problem making sure that the fermentation is just completely done, that the yeast not only have finished fermentation but have cleaned up diacetyl and acetaldehyde, the buttery and green apple flavors. And then I'll crash back down. Normally I'll rack to a keg, just so you don't have to deal with the airlock sucking in the sanitizer or the vodka or whatever you might use. So rack to a keg when it's done, and then just crash it down to freezing, leave it there for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, what have you, and then sort of treat it like you would any other beer, either keg it and carbonate it, or if you're going to bottle condition, you might want to repitch some fresh, healthy yeast just to make sure that there's something in there to eat the priming sugar.
Yeah, so the keys are just, pitch a whole lot of healthy yeast. Yeah. Be very mindful of your fermentation temperatures. Give it plenty of time to lager out. Just be patient with it. And the reason we call the article "The New Possibility" is like I'd love to see more people doing lagers. I think it's really underrepresented. I love a good lager. I wish there was just more on offer. So anything we can do to get the ball rolling, it's like. To spread the word that there's a whole new. There's so many different there's flavors that you can't get any other way. So
And if making that much yeast is a real problem, and you don't have a stir plate or you don't have an ability to make it large enough, I've actually had pretty good luck with dried lager yeast, and I'm just making sure that you are pitching enough, and using a yeast pitching rate calculator, figuring out how many grams of dry yeast you need. James, I know you did some experiments and had sort of mixed results on rehydrating the yeast. I'm a big believer in rehydration, just making sure the cells are And particularly if you're going to do something really strong, but even a regular gravity beer, just making sure the cells are in as good shape as they can be. The healthier they are, the cleaner they're going to be.
And especially when you're going to ferment at a lower temperature, it seems like you want to take all the extra steps that you can to make sure that you're pitching healthy, active yeast.
And another tip is to pitch the yeast when it's about the same temperature. You don't want to pitch, a starter you've had at, say, 70 degrees into 45-degree wort. That's a good way to make the yeast go dormant and
it's
not
a big shock to the system.
Yeah, and so I don't necessarily. There's some brewers who believe in growing the yeast at fermentation temperature. I'm fine growing them at 65 degrees or something like that. But I make sure I get them into the fridge. I make sure I get them sort of dropped down to a lower temperature before I pitch them.
Yeah, you could go from a lower temperature into a higher temperature in the fermenter.
Exactly, because that would be waking them up and they'd be getting more active. What you don't want is to trick them into thinking that it's freeze is coming and that they need to flocculate and protect themselves.
Yeah, I've only judged in a couple of homebrew competitions, but one of the categories that I did judge was pilsners. And pilsners can be wonderful when they're done properly, but we got some diacetyl bombs, unfortunately, and you could just almost smell the butterscotch coming out of the glass as the steward was pouring it across the table there. So,
and then it's sort of like a lot of people say like Pilsner Urquell. Some people say that actually, just a little bit of it can add to the fullness of the beer or whatever. But especially with people that are especially sensitive, it can be a very unpleasant experience.
It's one of those flavors that I think is a lot easier to overdo. That not having it'll still be a very good beer. Having too much can ruin it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would go to err on not having enough.
No, exactly, and that's. I think like a lot of things. Lager yeast. There's a lot of strains available, but I think I'd really recommend picking one and brewing a bunch of beers with it. And really learning what sort of pitching rates do, how much oxygen it needs, what sort of fermentation temperatures it benefits from, how long it needs. And really, they're all pretty clean. There are minor differences that you would get side by side, but there's not the sort of range that you have in ale yeast from something that Westmalle uses to Sierra Nevada to Weihenstephan to Fuller's. There's a lot of range there, and the range in lager yeast there certainly is one, but I think they're all a lot closer to one another.
So what are the workhorse strains that you would recommend to kind of if you've got training wheels on your lager fermentation fridge, what would you start off with?
And the Bavarian lager strain from Wyeast is really good. And I've even done that for like a beer de garden. It works well at like 60 or 62 degrees. It's a little bit fruity, but it's not going to give you any sort of weird, terrible off flavors if you let it get a little bit too warm or something like that. And the Pilsner Urquell strain is great, and I've used it with success, but it can get a little buttery, even with good process. So that's one that I would probably avoid unless you were doing a who can brew Pilsner Urquell contest.
Right. And you said that if you don't have the capacity to do the actual cold, a fermentation cold enough to be an actual lager fermentation, that you could use something like the steam ale yeast or the steam.
Find
as cold as you can.
Yeah, cleanest strain you can find, cold as you can do. And you can fake it pretty well.
I think particularly in a dark lager where again you have some malt character to compete with the yeast. If you're really trying to nail Munich Helles or something like that, I think you're at a lot more risk there of having the yeast character showing through. But in a Baltic porter,
and you could be brewing one of these San Francisco style, dark sort of lager kind of thingies, where it's sort of a marriage of the ale and the lager world,
Like I did a smoked Baltic pour with Kolschieß that turned out pretty well. And even those ale strains, even 1056-001 American ale can get pretty clean.
You keep it real low.
Yeah. I remember reading at some point that Sierra Nevada, back when they started, they only had one yeast strain, and for their lagers, they just ferment cow ale at 55 or 56 degrees, and that gave them a clean enough, bright enough product that people didn't realize it or notice, or it was still still delicious.
Huh. Well, there you go. Any other tips that we've forgotten or skipped over?
Well, if we did, just pick up the article, and I think Mike was showing me you can get. He's a subscriber. You get online. You can look at it. You can zoom in and all kinds of flip the pages online. It's pretty neat.
Because I lost my actual hard copy, and Nathan hasn't actually seen the hard copy.
Yeah, I hadn't gotten my copy yet. So, I mean that's the gist of it. Just like we hope that we would have inspired a few people to try something new. Really, there's
so much talk about extreme beers, and so many people try something crazy with weird adjuncts when they start out, and I think there's so much fertile ground for just really cool flavors that don't involve chili peppers or
and it's a real challenge.
I like these things. I mean, I like weird stuff, but there's a different kind of challenge, a different kind of fun involved with making these sort of traditional beers and learn the traditional process, even if you then use them to make a weird IPA or you use them to make a bourbon barrel-aged imperial, triple bottle,
as much as both of us really love, yeast-driven flavors, sometimes it's interesting to put that on mute and just try something different. So.
And now's the time of year to do it, even though it was 70 degrees in northwest Arkansas today. So.
We waited. It was like, it was like 65 last week. It was 20. It's going to be 70 at the end of the week.
I had a half day today because it was freezing rain. And then...
Well, guys, continued success with your professional brewing side, and don't forget us on the homebrew side as you're learning new things, and be sure to share them with us too.
And thanks for keeping us in the loop. And we always really look forward to these evenings with you. So
awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks again to Mike and to Nathan. You can get a free issue of Brew Your Own magazine by clicking on the banner on our basicbrewing.com site. And if you decide to subscribe after you read that issue, and who wouldn't, you'll be helping to support this show. One note from Mike, their Weizen Triple Bock recipe was based on information from Steve Berthel of The Livery. Mike sent me an email not long after we recorded that episode saying that Steve is apparently no longer with The Livery. I don't know what happened there, but we wish him the best, of course. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. Be sure to check out our DVDs, Extract Brewing and Partial Mashing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering, and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. You can find them all on our site. We've got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time, and you can check out our Basic Brewing shirts in the store, too. Our Brewers logbooks are in the store as well. Keep track of up to 50 batches of beer. And remember, you don't have to reboot them. You can see them in direct sunlight, and if you splash a little wort or a hot scotchy on them, it doesn't matter. They won't blow up. You can see a listing of the fine, at least I don't think they will. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com, and if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com, and I will put them in a box myself and send them out to you. How about that? Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We greatly appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Wacom Bamboo Splash Pen Tablet. And there were 16 of them ordered through our site last week, so we greatly appreciate that. Along with other bamboo splash pen tablet accessories and such. Very cool. And Texas Zombie Hunting Permit 2013/2014 bumper sticker. And you had to know I was going to read that. And there were a couple other zombie hunting things to put on your car as well. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We greatly appreciate your support, whether you're a zombie hunter or not. I cannot talk today. Maybe if you just want to hunt a zombie Belgian beer. Don't forget the American Homebrewers Association link as well, and don't forget to sign up for the conference. February 5th is the day registration opens for the Homebrewers Conference. That's all until next time. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dotson, our buddy in Austin, Texas, who I'm going to see this weekend. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.